back, it's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a savannah monitor lizard. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the savannah monitor lizard. It's got only a couple different colors, like a light brown underneath and then a darker brown up top. So we're just going to get started. They have scales. Right by the mouth, though, you can't really see it as easily. Now, I'm still debating. So typically when I draw snakes and lizards, I draw the individual scales, but that takes days, quite honestly, because of how long that kind of detail takes. So I'm debating on if that's what I'm going to do, or if I'm going to try and experiment to see if I can do that without having to draw them all individually. Potentially with the highlights and shadows, I can probably make some things happen. So on this step, right, it's just sort of another sketching step. I'm just getting the feel for the lizard, making sure that there's no line conflicts, not really shortening up my stroke length for the scales. I figure if I'm going to do this in the highlights and shadows, then it's okay to do it long because we'll be adding some extra detail using just the highlights and shadows. Even when I'm adding highlights and shadows, I'm probably going to do that and then add the details of the scales is what I'm currently thinking. So for now, it's just, making sure all the lines are making sense so they don't have to be short since we're already doing it a different way. There's going to be a lot of texture too by the eyes and elsewhere. And it's got kind of this ridge here. So just connecting it back in. Always layering one stroke in between the others as I draw. And matching the contour as much as I can. Right, so here we have clearly kind of a bulge of the eye. So matching that contour. And just not fully, filling it in. And of course, right by the eye, being a little bit more careful, simply because, eyes are something that we pick up on. We notice very clearly if something's wrong with how we've drawn an eye, because it's just sort of the nature of, the first thing we're drawn to are eyes. And so I'm typically more careful around an eye than I will be elsewhere. And then nice long strokes. And this lighter color is going to start dipping down. That probably wasn't the best transition. So what I just did will create a line conflict eventually. So I'm changing just a bit to prevent that from happening. And we're going to start bringing this color kind of down a bit. You still have the bottom lip to do. Kind of another bulge here for the ear. That's partially going to be in one color and partially in another. And then kind of a lot of folds and other things happening, which you can indicate by right, like a hump here will help indicate if I loop it underneath, right? Up, but down, or up and then down. can help indicate bumps and other things. They have kind of bumpy skin, so you don't have to be particularly, perfect on the strokes. Like all lizards. Pretty cute though. That one's probably good. Now for the darker color. So we'll just pick up where we left off, right? Fill in this top side. Not as much detail as was in the other, so should go a little quicker. Still have the ear. And then the other side of the ear. Nice and bumpy. And they can, again, be nice long strokes because of how we're going to draw them in. All right. Look at us go. Okay. We're going to start with the lighter color. So we're going to have a light source coming from above and to the right. As always, that means it's above and in front of it, not behind it or next to it. Because of that, all edges are in shadow. When you have a light source that's coming, from roughly here, you have a body that's rounding away. So this edge, even though it's on the side of the light source, will go into shadow, and then the back side, of course, will go into shadow. I'm actually just going to do one quick thing on the sketch layer, add just another point to the eye. Yeah. Okay. And then check your layers because it's a sad day when you draw on the wrong one. All right, and then we're just going to add that detail in. It's full pin pressure for a highlight and backed off pin pressure for a shadow, right? So all edges are in shadow, so we're going to do kind of this light pin pressure here. Right on that nose here. All the way down. And then full pin pressure, but we need to sort of taper this in to full pin pressure. You don't want like a jarring transition as it comes around. However, as it goes underneath, right, you're going to have kind of this edge where the mouth is. And as it comes underneath, that would go back into shadow because that's rounding down and into a recess of his mouth. And then again, from here, sort of gently bringing up the highlight into that full pin pressure again. Gonna continue the light pin pressure, following the mouth all the way up, even though here it connects together, because it's still going to be dipping in even if the mouth isn't open. Same is true for underneath, right? There's going to be a line where it's a little darker before the highlight kicks in, before it then goes back into shadow, because of course the bottom is going to be in shadow. And we're just following the lines we already did. Makes it much easier when you sketch out beforehand, right? I don't have to think about how to make the lines work. I already have done it. or fur direction in some cases, fur or feather direction. In this case, it's a little bit more straightforward because, well, right, it's just a lizard. So there's no fur direction, it's all just skin, but so I have some shadowing right through here on that tip, his chin, and then shadowing underneath. And then definitely some shadowing here, where it goes into the mouth. Do more on the edge than we will elsewhere. And make sure there's some of this still happening as it connects in. That shadowing along the mouth. And then kicking it into highlight. Sort of making sure to taper it in, right? Just like with above. Always want to make sure this tapers into a shadow instead of creating a jagged edge where the shadow is. And then as it comes down, we're going to be increasing this shadow, right? As his face sort of, you know, the jaw hooks in and you have the shadow underneath. But you can kind of see very clearly where his mouth is. Fix that just a little bit. Right, so we have a deepening shadow here. It's going to really deepen up in a second. Because of how the head is contoured. And you have, okay, so you have wrinkles and other things to consider too. So write all of this in shadow. Then you also have kind of this edge underneath, well, that's like a little bump here. You can see because of the change in direction of the drawing, I can clearly see the bump to create the contour. And the same thing on this back side. You have a bump, so therefore you're going to have a shadow behind the bump. And even still, you want this nice big shadow coming off. Now, there is also some shadowing. Sometimes I'll do this, where I'll do the shadow first. Just it becomes a little easier. Well, because I won't have to think about it once I start putting full pin pressure. Some shadowing here as it goes into the ear. And on the back side, because this is a little bit of a ridge, there'll be some shadowing. The hump of the ear. Probably some right here as the jaw connects in. Maybe a little bit. It's easier to add shadows than it is to undo highlights. So adding a shadow in gives me more control, and all I have to do to fix it is add more pin pressure or add more lines, because inevitably, you know, it's the shadow, so I can build up the highlight. there's going to be some shadowing under the eye where this connects in, so, or above the eye, I should say. And on this side, right, light source coming from above and to the right, therefore any dip would happen on the side of the light source, whereas the opposite is true once we clear it underneath, right? This will be in highlight. It's right against that eye. But we have to clear where the shadow would catch. We're going to have some shadowing in these creases. And on the back side of the eye. And underneath. And again, some shadowing back here. We have that back side. I'm going to do a little bit, there's a ridge right here. Yeah, we're going to do it into this section. I was just debating on if I do it, yeah, I'll do it right through here. Some of this might be in highlight because the ridge would come down, but somewhere along here there's a ridge, just a little one, where it'd be casting a shadow underneath. Before kicking back into highlight. And then of course we have the nostril where we're going to have some shadowing. And then some highlight on the other side. Still just that light pin pressure. Alright, so if we take that off, right, we have some defined features now. And we can put full pin pressure as we come on back. I'm going to do some light pin pressure here too. I think I intended that to be there. Okay. And then yeah, just full pin pressure in this color, because then we have the transition of colors that needs to happen. But it'll be, you know, kind of the same thing with that. If I get the pin pressure for that, get the shadows in first, won't take much to then build up the highlight. And then from there we can look at adding the detail of the scales. Just be a matter of adding more pin pressure in areas that would have, I want the scales to show, which could be everywhere, but adding little like bursts. Oops. I know it's not tapered in yet, but I'll get there. Giving myself, I try when I'm doing this, when I add the shadows first, I'll try to give myself extra, you know, wiggle room so that I can then sort of harshly add the highlights and then taper them in. Sometimes I don't give myself enough room, but I think I have. Not, we'll make it work either way. Again, still following those contours that I've already drawn in. So following that same line direction, because that'll also help indicate contours in his face and body. Or neck, I guess. Face and neck. Now there is going to be some shadowing. It's going into a recess where this ear is. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap. I might have gone too far with the color. Yeah, I think I might have. think I have it gapping here. Just gonna come up and erase it. And then on the top, there's that color change. I got a little overzealous. I think that's happening somewhere along this line. But because I already followed maybe not. Through here. Because I already followed the lines, shouldn't make it too awkward of an erasure to take out a section. There we go. All right, so on the back side of this eye, there's going to be highlight right here because it's where it'd be catching, right? It's coming out of a recess in our heads. Same is true for underneath. Right. I'm going to give it a little bit of a shadow here. I think I'd intended it to have some. We have the nostril here. And then of course, you're right, like this backside here, it's going to be in shadow. Because that rounds away from the light source too, which means all of this will be but some of this will be highlight. Okay, so I'm going to finish down in here and then I'm going to taper in the shadows and then we're going to get the other color in. So down in here, we're going to still have some highlights happening. And I'm going to fade it off as we come to these edges. Kind of like I did down here too. That'll help make the end, the edge of it, look a little bit more tapered instead of just sort of a harsh cutoff, since I didn't have a good place when I did the composition to sort of gently taper it off. I'm going to taper it by tapering the pin pressure and adding shadow instead. Looks a little weird right now with just the one color. Right, and then just backing off the pin pressure as we come to the edge. Not putting as many strokes either, just sort of thinning it out. Okay, now. So, where we've already added shadow, you don't actually have to put a lot of pin pressure. You can just add more lines and it will brighten it up, right? So we're just going to taper all of this in. We don't want this to be a jagged transition. Right, you can see how harsh this is right now. We don't want that. It's to be much, much gentler. between the edges. So just adding a lot of lines, focusing more on the connection point, right? Like up in here, adding more lines to brighten up this transition over, because I want it to fade. So this is where that start of the fade happens. And then right here as well. If it looks jagged, it won't look natural. And then right, fading it down in here as well, because these are sort of humps in the wrinkles, crinkling of the body, I don't know. And over here, adding some of this in as it fades into his ear. And then of course this section as well. We'll get up by the eyes and then see if there's anywhere else that needs some transitioning. Same thing down here, doesn't need much, but a little bit. And then the eyes. Don't need as much in some places as others, only where it looks harsh. And over in here. I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of a burst right up in here. So that's one color. Now for the darker one, be doing the same thing. And lining it up sometimes in the same place, right, where you have that little bit of shadowing coming in here, shadowing along the back of the ear. Shadowing right over here, not much. And then, you know, we'll have that same sort of sporadic shadowing as we come down. And then shadowing on this back edge. There's not quite as much, right? There was a lot more contouring happening in here. They have all the little scales or whatever, so they're pretty bumpy, which helps when we're adding in shadow. Doesn't have to be a nice straight line. just like that underneath, gonna have a little bit of a deep shadow over here too, because it's definitely aimed away from the light source. A little shadowing up in here. Alright, same kind of sporadic pattern. And then a little bit of shadowing all the way back. But not on top. You would have the light source sitting here, so I'm giving myself a runway. That helps me taper shadows. And then it's sort of rounding, so it would be, some of this would be catching the light, even though I'm adding shadow at the moment. Okay. And then full pin pressure. And then, right, it's just nice long strokes. So this is relatively straightforward for now. And we'll see about adding in some detail after we get this in, before we do the eye. So he's looking pretty good. Now, to do some detail, what we're going to do is sort of, I've kind of half drawn out these little spots where there would be scales. So continuing that idea on, because we can always add more pin pressure. Of course I'm doing this on the same layer. No, I'm not. Oh, smart. Big believer in always starting a new layer to do something like this. Because of how we're drawing it, it should show up. We don't want it too out of place though. So now, if I take that off, you can see it, but we can apply that kind of all over. Smaller scales as you bring them down, because in the nature of how we're doing it, we don't really have to have them so detailed, which is helpful. Typically when I do it the other way, you really have to make sure they're lined up, and yeah, it can be hard. This will give that effect, hopefully, without looking out of place. Kind of circular. That's why I'm creating bulges on it. just by adding in, you know, more lines, you can create it. And here I'm not putting full pin pressure, so I don't want to make it look out of place, so this is light pin pressure, just enough to indicate there's something different. Now we're going to do the same for the other color. Alright, so that creates some variation in it. There is a darker color that you'll see on some of these scales. I'm going to go ahead and draw some of that in. These scales that I kind of free-handed here. This should add a little bit of variation to it as well. Just another subtle burst of color. All right. I am going to fix the nose real fast. It doesn't quite look right, like the shadowing's a little off because I had that burst here. I need to blend that in with its surroundings, and then fading this on this side. And then the deeper the shadow, right, the deeper the recess, so I'm going to taper off how deep I've made this recess. It's not that deep. It's there, and there should be a shadow, but not quite so extreme. Now we're going to add in the eye. Our eyes are red, best I can tell. I've tempered it a bit. Still red. So we're going to just, right, do kind of a circle all the way around. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. We'll use the elliptical Mach-E tool to help define that a bit. Sketch that in. This is just light pin pressure, just like when we drew out the lizard. This is just a sketching step so I can get the circularness of it and decide whether or not I push it up into the part up here, which I'm probably going to do because I already circled the pupil. There's enough black space that I think it should be fine. You can see it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, right? I don't make straight strokes. My hands always wobble, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm also now going to take it and shift it just a little. Okay, so we'll take the elliptical Mach-E tool, straighten out this pupil. I know it's looking just off to our left, but we're going to be adding in a light flare, and I don't want the light flare to make it look like it's looking off to the right. Okay. Light source coming from above and to the right, so that means that I'm going to have a burst of light against the pupil and on the opposite side of the light source, right? Because the pupil is a recess in our heads. So as the recess comes back out, it's going to be catching the light on the opposite side. Light source coming from over here, therefore here is going to catch like on the edge of a cup. Whereas on the side of the light source, this edge of the pupil will be going into shadow. Although, I don't know, I just fixed that because I got rid of that. Okay. And then on the side of the light source, we put full pit pressure for the highlight going all the way to the edge, but then we taper it off at the edge. It is going into shadow. And again, tapering it off as we get towards the pupil. But this highlight's going to go all the way underneath and connect into this burst of light down here. So all the way underneath before it goes into shadow on the back side. And on the edges. So light pin pressure as we come to this back side, but this is going to need to be brighter than the top because the top is going into shadow where, you know, the top of the eye is blocking it. And need to make sure that this sort of burst of light on the pupil fades in nicely and isn't out of place. Right. And just fade it all the way in. So light pin pressure. And then fade it in just like we did with the shadows and highlights elsewhere. Fade all of this in. Down here, you know, you can really give it a nice burst because this is where the light should really be catching. Sometimes I'll do it in different colors, but we won't for this one. Right, you get a nice burst in that color. And then the most important part of an eye is adding the light flare. Take the elliptical marquee tool and just create like a little circle. Make sure it's in the highlighted section, right? I don't want to do it too high because this is where the shadow kicks in. On the side of the light source, and then just edit and fill with the foreground color because I already changed it to white. And there we go. Alright, so that is how you draw a savannah monitor lizard. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.